The early morning sun painted golden streaks across the wooden floors of the modest home on Maple Street. Dust particles danced in the air, illuminated in the warm light, while the walls echoed with hurried footsteps and the dragging of cardboard boxes. Max, a 5-year-old German shepherd with warm amber eyes and a thick sable coat, lay curled up on the edge of the living room rug, his favorite spot, right next to the couch where Jamie used to lie and read books aloud to him, but today felt off. He sensed something. The energy in the house had changed. It buzzed with tension and urgency, filled with voices that sounded different, shorter, sharper. Max tilted his head as he watched Jamie's parents rush by with bags and boxes, talking over each other, barely noticing him. He wagged his tail, hoping one of them would stop to give him a scratch behind the ears, a smile, or a word of comfort. But none came. Max stood and padded softly to the kitchen where his food bowl had always been, hoping to see his breakfast. But the bowl was gone. The mat beneath it had been rolled up and stuffed inside a box. He sniffed the air. Familiar scents were fading, masked by cardboard and tape. He turned toward the hallway and saw Jamie, his boy, standing at the top of the stairs, holding a teddy bear in one hand and a backpack in the other. Jamie's eyes were red and he clutched the bear tightly against his chest. For a moment, their eyes met. Max's tail thumped once on the floor. Jamie opened his mouth, as if to say something, but then his mother called his name sharply and he turned away. Max followed him. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew something big was about to change. He walked to the front door where the open space beyond it seemed to signal an end. The living room was stripped bare. The couch, the coffee table, even the old armchair where Max used to rest his head against Jamie's knee. All gone. Only the echo of memories remained. Max wandered outside, confused. He could hear the rumble of the moving truck and saw the last few boxes being loaded. Jamie stood near the back seat of the family silver SUV, shoulders hunched, not speaking. The boy looked up as Max approached, and for a moment, Jamie dropped the teddy bear and knelt down. He wrapped his arms around Max's thick neck, burying his face into the soft fur. "I'm sorry," Jamie whispered so softly it was nearly lost in the wind. "I wanted to take you, I begged them. But Dad said there's no space, and then Mom said it'd be easier this way. I don't want to leave you." Max pressed his body close, ears low, tail wagging with uncertainty. He could feel Jamie's heartbeat against his chest, fast and scared. Max didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. Something wasn't right. Something was being taken away. A sharp voice broke through the moment. "Jamie, we're leaving. Get in the car." Jamie reluctantly pulled back, eyes filled with tears, and gave Max one last stroke along the head. "Stay here, boy. Maybe they'll come for you later." Max tilted his head as if to ask, "What do you mean? I'm coming too, aren't I?" But Jamie had already climbed into the car. The door slammed shut. The engine roared to life. Max backed away from the sound, unsure. The moving truck pulled away first, followed by the SUV. Max's heart began to race. He ran to the end of the driveway, watching them drive off. His paws scraped the pavement as he bolted after them. He ran faster than he'd ever run before, ears flattened against his head, eyes locked on the shrinking silver vehicle ahead. He barked, once, then again, his voice cracking in desperation. His legs pounded the asphalt. His breath came in sharp bursts. He couldn't understand why were they driving away without him. He chased the car for 2 long blocks, weaving between hedges and parked vehicles, but they never slowed, never looked back. Eventually, his body gave out. His lungs burned, and his paws ached. The car disappeared around a corner, swallowed by the distance. He stood there in the middle of the street, panting, chest heaving, eyes wide and bewildered. He waited another moment, thinking they would come back, but they didn't. Slowly, he turned and began the long walk back to the only place he knew as home. When he returned to the empty house, the moving truck was gone. The driveway was bare, the front door was locked. He scratched at it lightly with his paw, whined, circled the porch. Nothing. The windows stared back at him blankly, lifeless and cold. Max curled up on the welcome mat where he had waited every day for Jamie to come home from school. He laid, his head between his front paws, ears still twitching at every sound. He watched the road for any sign of the SUV. The smell of Jamie still lingered faintly on the steps, mixed with the scent of cardboard and old wood. He closed his eyes and dreamed of his boy's laughter, of soft hands brushing his fur, of stories, read in a child's voice under the soft glow of a reading lamp. Hours passed, then a whole day. Max stayed. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, murmuring to each other. A few recognized him and frowned in quiet dismay. They knew the family had moved. They hadn't mentioned anything about taking Max. A man from 2 houses down came by and set a small bowl of water on the porch. Max lifted his head and sniffed it, but his eyes were on the road. Always on the road. As night fell, the temperature dropped. Wind rustled the dry grass in the yard. Max didn't move from his post. His body curled tighter, his breathing slow and steady. He waited as the stars emerged one by one above the house he still called home. He didn't understand why they left, but in his heart there was no room for resentment. Only love and hope. The kind of hope that could only come from a dog who had given everything and was still willing to wait. Because to Max, love wasn't something that could be packed in a box and driven away. It was something you stayed for. The mornings grew colder, and the leaves that once danced joyfully in the breeze now spiraled down in brittle silence, covering the yard in amber and brown. Max remained on the porch, curled in the same corner where he'd always waited for Jamie to return from school. At first he sat with alert eyes, ears perked at every passing car, tail thumping with a flicker of hope. But each time the car rolled past without slowing, that flicker dimmed just a little. He didn't move far. Not because he couldn't, but because deep in his loyal heart, he believed they would return, that they must return. Max didn't know about leases ending or moving vans, or what it meant when neighbors whispered. They just left him. He only knew love, and love meant waiting. The neighborhood watched as days turned to weeks. Some people pitied the loyal German shepherd who wouldn't leave the stoop. Others avoided looking, perhaps because guilt sat too heavy on their own chests. A woman from across the street, Mrs. Langley, began leaving food by the gate every morning. She was older, walked with a cane, and spoke gently to Max, calling him sweetheart and good boy. But no matter how kind her tone, Max would not cross the gate. His bowl sat untouched unless she stepped away far enough for him to feel alone again. Only then would he rise, bones aching more with each day, and nudge the kibble softly, as if he expected to find Jamie's scent beneath it. Nights were the worst. The porch, once warm with the smell of family, grew cold and quiet. The wind howled through the cracks of the empty house, and sometimes Max would whimper in his sleep, his paws twitching as if he were running. In dreams, maybe chasing the car again, maybe trying to catch up to the only people he had ever loved. Sometimes he barked into the night, startling passers-by, not out of aggression, but desperation, as if he were calling out to Jamie, "I'm still here. I'm waiting." One afternoon it rained, not just a light drizzle, but a bitter, unrelenting downpour that soaked everything in minutes. The cardboard boxes neighbors left on their curbs melted into mush. Trash bins toppled, storm drains clogged. Max remained on the porch, his fur heavy and slick against his body, water pooling beneath his paws. A young boy walking home from school stopped in front of the house, holding a bright yellow umbrella. He looked at Max and frowned. "Why doesn't he go inside?" he asked his older sister. She only shook her head. "He's waiting for someone," she whispered. "And he doesn't know they're not coming back." The boy crouched down and called to Max, holding out a sandwich from his lunchbox. Max didn't move. He just watched them, eyes dull with hope that refused to die. The children stood there for a while, letting the rain soak their shoes before walking on. Max didn't even shiver. The cold didn't matter. The hunger didn't matter. What mattered was the road. The road that still hadn't brought Jamie back. As time passed, Max's once bright coat began to dull. His ribs showed a little more each week. The pads of his paws cracked. Yet no matter how hard the wind blew, no matter how cold the nights got, he would not leave the porch. When the sun peeked through the clouds, he would sit facing the street, tail curled tightly around his side, watching, waiting, always waiting. One day, a woman from animal control came. She wore a badge and carried a leash and a clipboard. She spoke to a few neighbors, then approached the porch slowly, crouching a few feet away from Max. Her voice was soft. "Hey, buddy. You've been out here a long time, huh?" Max raised his head, ears tilting toward her, but didn't move. The woman set down a small container of chicken and backed away, giving him space. He sniffed it, then looked back to the road. The woman sighed. "You're not making this easy, you know. You're waiting for someone who's not coming." She tried again the next day, and the next. Each time she came closer, Max would grow uneasy, not growl, but shift further back on the porch. He didn't want to be taken away, not from this house, not from the place where Jamie might one day return. This porch was all he had left of them. His entire world was reduced to its four corners. One night, Mrs. Langley brought over an old blanket and tried to drape it over Max as he lay shivering. He didn't resist. She gently stroked his back, her fingers trembling. "You're breaking all of our hearts, sweet boy," she whispered. "They didn't deserve you. But you still wait." Max looked at her with tired eyes. He wasn't trying to make anyone sad. He was just being what he was. Loyal, faithful, a dog who had given his love unconditionally, and who didn't understand how people could walk away from that. Weeks blurred into months. Snow came early that year. The first flakes landed on Max's nose as he sat on the porch unmoving. He blinked them away, then laid his head down gently. The house behind him was silent, still empty. The curtains were drawn. The mailbox overflowed. But none of that mattered. He wasn't waiting for mail. He wasn't waiting for food. He was waiting for Jamie. Even as the snow built up around him, even as the world began to forget that anyone had ever lived in that house, Max remembered. Dogs remember in ways humans don't understand. They remember the sound of a child's laugh, the rhythm of footsteps coming home, the smell of pajamas after bath time, the feel of small arms wrapped tightly around their neck. And when those things vanish, dogs don't just forget and move on. They stay. Neighbors began to refer to him simply as the waiting dog. He became part of the street, part of the story. Some offered to adopt him, others begged animal control to intervene. But each time someone tried to take him, he would slip back to the porch or hide beneath the steps until they left. The porch had become his sanctuary, his tether to a family that no longer claimed him. It was where his love lived, where his memories waited, where his hope remained. Because Max didn't know how to give up. He didn't know how to let go. All he knew was that once a boy named Jamie loved him. And maybe, just maybe, that boy might come back. And so, beneath the heavy skies of winter, Max waited. For love, for home, for the only family he had ever known. The street had long forgotten laughter. The house stood like a monument to abandonment, boards nailed across windows, weeds curling up through the cracks in the driveway. Yet there he was, the same noble silhouette resting on the porch like a guardian watching over memories that no longer lived inside. Max had stopped perking up when cars passed. He no longer barked at bicycles or wagged his tail at joggers. The spark in his eyes had dulled, slowly replaced by a kind of quiet resignation that twisted the heart of anyone who truly stopped to look at him. It was a Tuesday when everything began to shift, though Max didn't know it yet. The sky had bruised itself in thick gray clouds, and the cold carried a bite sharp enough to make even the most dedicated dog lovers hurry along with gloved hands in their pockets. But one stranger, a man in his early 30s with worn boots and a backpack slung low on his shoulder, stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Max. His name was Caleb. He had just moved into a rental 2 blocks down, newly relocated for work and still learning the names of streets and shortcuts. On his way back from the bus stop, he'd noticed the house first, how abandoned it felt, how time had begun reclaiming it. Then he noticed the dog. At first, he thought the poor creature was a statue, frozen in some expression of watchfulness. But then Max blinked, slow, weary, alive. Caleb crossed the street cautiously, not wanting to scare him. "Hey there, buddy," he called gently, kneeling by the gate. "You okay?" Max didn't lift his head. He looked at Caleb, but not like a dog expecting kindness, more like a soldier who'd been left behind and no longer believed in rescue. His tail didn't move, his body barely stirred. Still, Caleb saw it, the sadness, the weight of hope, slowly giving way to heartbreak. He looked around. No leash, no collar, no sign of food or toys, only a scratched bowl beside the steps half buried in dirt and leaves. Mrs. Langley happened to be walking by at that moment, pushing her small cart of groceries. "Is he yours?" Caleb asked her. She stopped, smiling at Max in the way people smile at something precious and broken. "No. He belonged to a family that used to live there. They moved out months ago, left him behind." Caleb's brow furrowed. "They just left him?" "They left in the middle of the night," she said, her voice tinged with quiet fury. "Didn't even leave a note. He chased their car down the street when they drove off. That was the last time anyone saw him run." Caleb swallowed the lump, forming in his throat. "Has anyone tried to take him in?" "Plenty. He won't leave. We've all tried. Animal control too, but he always finds his way back. He's waiting for them to come back." The weight of her words hung in, the air thick with unspoken sorrow. Caleb nodded slowly and knelt down again. "Hey, buddy," he said, softer this time. "That's real loyalty you've got there." He reached into his backpack and pulled out half a sandwich. "Turkey." He tore a piece and placed it gently on the ground, backing up. Max sniffed the air, looked at the meat, then slowly rose. His joints cracked audibly as he moved. He was getting older. Caleb watched as Max patted over, sniffed, and carefully took the food in his mouth before walking back to the porch. He didn't eat it right away. He placed it beside him, like he wanted to save it, like he was waiting to share it. That image sat with Caleb long after he walked home that night. The next day he came back, this time with a blanket, a small thermos of warm broth, and a quiet resolve in his heart. He sat by the gate again and talked to Max. Just talked, not expecting anything in return. He told him about his own dog, Buddy, who'd passed a year ago from cancer, how he'd been his best friend when no one else stayed, how he still sometimes reached for the leash in the morning, forgetting there was no one to walk. "Loss does that," he whispered. "Makes you forget what's gone and remember all the wrong things first." Max stared at him with those deep, sad eyes. He didn't come closer, but something flickered. A recognition, maybe. A sense that Caleb, unlike others, understood. And so the pattern began. Every day, Caleb stopped by, sometimes with treats, sometimes with stories, sometimes just to sit, quietly, and be there. He didn't try to force anything. He let Max be Max, loyal, stubborn, heartbroken. But slowly, the dog's posture changed. He didn't rise when Caleb came, but his eyes brightened. His ears twitched. He started eating the food while Caleb was still nearby. And once, when the man laughed at something, Max tilted his head. Just slightly. But it was something. It was progress. The other neighbors began to notice. "That new guy's really making an effort," one said. "Maybe he'll be the one who finally gets through." Mrs. Langley, ever hopeful, brought Caleb a photo she'd taken weeks ago. Max curled up in the snow, head resting on a worn toy, left behind. "You have a kind soul," she told Caleb. "That dog sees it. Don't give up on him." Caleb looked at the photo and felt something stir deep in his chest. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just couldn't ignore the pain in Max's eyes, the kind that comes from love unreturned. The weather turned colder. Caleb brought a small tarp and rigged it over the porch with Mrs. Langley's help to shield Max from the snow. He left a thick bed of hay beneath it and a rubber mat for insulation. Max didn't resist. He laid on it with a heavy sigh, as if grateful, but still, he never left. Until one evening, just as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet, Max did something different. He stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, and stepped down. Only one step, only for a moment. But it was the first time in months. Caleb watched from the gate, barely breathing. "You're not just waiting anymore, are you?" he whispered. "You're wondering." Max looked at him, the wind rustling through his fur, and blinked slowly. Maybe, just maybe, the waiting heart had noticed a new light in the darkness. A light that didn't come from the past, but from the possibility of something new, something healing, something like hope. The porch had become a place of quiet reckonings. With every sunrise, the frost that lined the old wooden rails thawed just a little more. And with every visit, Caleb chipped away at the wall Max had built around his broken heart. It had now been several weeks since Caleb first offered that torn piece of sandwich. Since then, time had wrapped its gentle hands around both man and dog, guiding them slowly, almost imperceptibly, toward something fragile but growing. Max had started, walking a few steps past the porch now. Nothing bold or rushed, just measured, hesitant movements. Sometimes he'd wander to the edge of the cracked front path when Caleb arrived, standing still, tail low, but no longer tucked between his legs. Other times, when the wind was soft and Caleb sat reading aloud from the old books he brought with him, Max would lay closer, maybe a foot or two away, resting his head on his paws, listening. Caleb never reached out to touch him. Not yet. He sensed that Max was still living in two worlds, one rooted deeply in loyalty to a family that had left him, the other peering curiously at this gentle man who kept showing up without asking for anything. One cold morning, snowflakes drifting, like feathers through the crisp air, Caleb arrived early. He was carrying something different, a leash. It wasn't a demand, but a quiet offering. The leash was old, made of soft leather, with faded stitching and a brass clip that still gleamed. When the sun hit it right, it had belonged to Buddy, Caleb's own lost companion. He knelt down by the gate and held it out in his hand, letting it rest against his knee. "I brought this for you," he said, voice tender. "You don't have to wear it. Just wanted you to know it's here, if you ever want to come with me." Max watched him. His eyes flicked to the leash, then to Caleb and back again. Something stirred in his chest, an ache that wasn't quite pain, but not comfort either. A recognition, a memory. His old leash had once been purple, clipped to a red collar. The girl Olivia used to giggle as she ran with him, the leash bouncing with every step. Her tiny hands would tug too hard sometimes, but Max never minded. That leash meant love. It meant belonging. Now this new one sat before him like a question he didn't know how to answer. Caleb didn't push. He set the leash gently on the ground and opened his thermos. The aroma of warm chicken broth wafted into the winter air, and Max sniffed, tail giving a soft thump. "You don't have to choose today," Caleb said, pouring the broth into a bowl. "But I'll be back tomorrow, and the day after, as long as it takes." That night, as the sun dipped beneath a blanket of gray clouds, Max didn't sleep on the porch. He curled into the haybed beneath the tarp, warmer than he'd been in months. The leash lay just inches away from him. He stared at it as though it held the power to change everything. In a way, it did. The next morning, Max wasn't there when Caleb arrived. Panic seized his chest for a split second. Had something happened? Had animal control finally taken him? But then he saw it. Paw prints in the snow, leading from the tarp, across the porch, down the street. He followed them slowly, his boots crunching the snow. Just around the corner near a lamppost, Caleb found Max sitting under a bush, shivering but alert. He looked up at Caleb with something unreadable in his gaze. Not fear, not sorrow. Something braver. "You went looking for them again, didn't you?" Caleb asked softly. Max looked away, his ears flattening slightly. Caleb crouched down, holding out a piece of bread. "It's okay. I get it. Some part of you still thinks they'll come back." Max didn't move for a long while. Then slowly, he crept forward and took the bread from Caleb's hand. He didn't run back to the porch this time. He stood there, close, uncertain, but willing to stay a little longer. From that day forward, Max began following Caleb for a few paces every time he left. Not far, never more than a few yards, but enough to suggest that a thread was forming between them, delicate and invisible. Caleb started bringing a second leash just in case. He kept it clipped to his backpack, always ready, but never forced. One afternoon, after the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring peeked through the cold earth, Caleb found Max standing by the gate, waiting. This time he walked to Caleb first. The moment was still. No cars, no people, just the sound of two hearts trying to understand one another. Caleb sat on the porch steps, patting the space beside him. "You want to sit with me today?" Max hesitated. Then slowly he stepped forward and lay beside Caleb for the first time. The man didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. Max rested his chin on Caleb's boot. That evening, as they sat together watching the sun bathe the street in gold, Caleb finally whispered, "I lost someone too, you know. Buddy was my whole world. When he died, I thought I didn't have room to love another. But maybe we're both wrong. Maybe hearts have more space than we think." Max closed his eyes, breathing deep. That night, as the moon rose, Caleb gently placed the leash beside Max again. "Whenever you're ready." At dawn, for the first time, Max wasn't on the porch. He was sitting by Caleb's gate, waiting. The sunrise painted soft pastels across the sleepy town as Caleb rubbed his eyes and stepped out onto his porch, holding his usual thermos of warm broth. The chill had begun to wane. Spring was breathing life back into the world. Trees once bare now bloomed with timid buds, and the scent of damp earth lingered in the breeze. Caleb sipped slowly, watching the world unfold until his eyes caught a movement across the street. Max was sitting there, not on the porch of his old home, but at Caleb's gate. The old dog looked thinner than he should have, his fur still matted in places, but his eyes, they carried something new, something fragile, yet undeniably present. Hope. It had taken weeks, months of gentle presence, soft offerings, and unwavering patience, but he had finally moved, not just physically, but emotionally. Caleb knew what that meant. The last tie to the family that had abandoned him was fraying. Caleb didn't move too quickly. He set his thermos down, walked slowly to the edge of the porch, and crouched. "Hey there, Max, you ready?" Max didn't wag his tail, not in the usual energetic way dogs do, but he stood and walked up the path, as if answering not just a question, but a calling. Caleb reached into his coat pocket, pulling out the old leather leash. He knelt, offering it one last time. Max looked at it for a long second. Then, in a single heartbreaking gesture, he lowered his head and allowed Caleb to gently clip the leash to his collar. No resistance, no flinch, just trust. Caleb blinked back tears, his fingers shaking as they fastened the clip. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You've been such a good, brave boy." The walk to Caleb's house wasn't far, but each step felt monumental. Max paused only once, at the center of the street, to turn his head toward the old house. His ears twitched as if listening for something, perhaps the echo of a child's laugh or the creak of a familiar door. But nothing stirred. The curtains remained still. The home, like the family that left, had long moved on. Still, Max looked for several long seconds, his body trembling slightly. Caleb stood beside him in silence, hand loosely holding the leash, giving him the time he needed. "It's okay," he said softly, tears glistening. "You're not giving up on them. You're just choosing to keep living." And somehow, Max seemed to understand. He turned back toward Caleb, nuzzling his hand with emotion that said more than words ever could. Inside Caleb's home, warmth greeted them like a gentle hug. The air smelled of cinnamon and old books, and a soft, fleece bed had been laid out by the fireplace. Toys lined the corner, some new, some worn, and a food bowl shimmered beside a full dish of water. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Max sniffed around cautiously at first, tail low, unsure if he was truly allowed to belong, but Caleb made no demands. He moved quietly around the kitchen, pouring himself coffee, humming gently. Eventually, Max made his way to the fireplace, circled twice, and lowered himself onto the bed with a long, tired sigh. He slept for hours. Caleb didn't leave his side. He sat in an armchair nearby, reading aloud from the book he always brought, occasionally glancing over. Max twitched in his sleep. Little movements, memories tangled in his dreams. Once or twice, a soft whine escaped his muzzle, and Caleb would quietly say, "You're safe now, buddy, just sleep." But healing doesn't come overnight, and grief has claws that don't loosen easily. Even after moving in, Max continued visiting the old house. Sometimes Caleb would wake to find the leash hanging by the door, but no Max in sight. He always knew where to find him, lying on the porch of the empty home, his eyes locked on the front door as if it might open one day and his family would come back with arms wide and voices calling his name. Caleb never dragged him away. He'd sit beside him sometimes for hours, bringing food, companionship, silence. On those days, he wouldn't say much. He just waited until Max was ready to come home again. Then, one rainy morning, something changed. Max didn't go to the porch. He stood by Caleb's bed, tail gently wagging, and placed his paw on the edge of the blanket. Caleb opened his eyes slowly, startled at first, but then smiled. "Hey," he whispered. "You're staying today?" Max licked his hand once, and Caleb nodded, heart swelling. That day, Max didn't look back at the empty house. He chose to stay. Over the following weeks, Max began to bloom. He barked for a year. The first time, a deep, gruff sound when a squirrel darted across the backyard. He chased a tennis ball one afternoon, awkward and clumsy, but laughing in his own doggy way. He started sleeping through the night without nightmares, curled into the bed by the fire. But one moment sealed it all. It was Olivia's birthday. Caleb hadn't known, but he saw Max pacing near the window, agitated, whining softly. He brought out a toy, a stuffed elephant Caleb had once found in Max's hiding spot near the porch, and placed it before him. "You miss her today, don't you?" Caleb said, gently. Max picked up the toy and carried it to the porch. He sat down and placed it at the foot of the steps. Caleb watched from the window as Max stared out into the dusk, the toy resting like an offering. Then, after a long, painful minute, Max stood up and walked back inside. That night, for the first time, Max climbed into Caleb's lap and rested his head against the man's chest. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just closed his eyes and let himself be loved. "Caleb," cried quietly, arms wrapped around the dog who had waited for so long to be chosen again. "You never stopped loving them," he whispered into Max's fur, "but you let me love you too. That's more than I could have asked for." From that day on, Max still looked out the window sometimes, but not to wait, to remember. Because love doesn't mean forgetting. Love means making space for memories, for heartbreak, for second chances. And Max had chosen to make room for all of it, in the quiet safety of a home built on trust, warmth, and endless patience. Max found what he thought he'd lost forever. Not a family, but a future.